On the night of April the 27th, 1945 in Berlin, fires raged out of control as the intense and savage Russian artillery bombardment crept closer to the center of the Third Reich. Deep in his bunker, the man who had brought such destruction to his country and indeed the world knew that the war was over. The Führer's options were limited. He could allow himself to be captured by the advancing Russians, but the humiliation was unthinkable. He could kill himself, but who could possibly replace him? Or he could try and escape and live to fight another day. Shortly after the war ended, a BBC journalist, Thomas Cadet, was allowed into Hitler's ruined bunker by Russian forces. Interestingly, this is what he said.
Outside the front door of the shelter are the 5 perforated petrol tins that were believed to have been used for scattering petrol on the body of Hitler and of burning it. But there, at any rate, my Soviet friends found no trace of Hitler himself. But there was the half-burned body of a man with a lock of black hair on the right-hand side of his face and a little black moustache. And they looked at him more closely, and their doctors came to the conclusion that it was what they call a bad double of Hitler and not Hitler himself. If that is so, then all trace of him has disappeared.
Hitler's body hadn't yet been found, but the next day, the news of his death made the headlines worldwide, except in the Soviet Union. Pravda, the official Communist Party newspaper and voice of the Kremlin, wrote that the claim Hitler was dead was a ruse to enable him to escape. Similarly, in Paris, L'Humanité questioned the report. Meanwhile, in the grounds of the Chancellery, the search for Hitler's body continued among the rubble and corpses. One of them closely resembled the dictator, especially because of the typical moustache. Excitement and restlessness spread. Experts were called in, but despite the resemblance and the moustache, it was clear that it was not Hitler. Nevertheless, the legend of a double was born. All Soviet troops marching into Berlin were ordered to keep an eye out for Hitler. But the real search was done in secret and carried out by only 3 people. And the Soviet High Command in Berlin officially continued the search for Hitler, dead or alive. A medal was even promised to the person who succeeded in capturing him. Although the Smersh investigation was undertaken in utmost secrecy, rumors were circulating outside the Soviet zone, which made their way into the international media. Had the Russians found and identified the Nazi leader's body? Everyone waited for Soviet confirmation. The Kremlin remained silent. At the end of May 1945, Harry Hopkins, an advisor to US President Harry Truman, went to Moscow for a series of talks with Stalin to prepare the first post-war conference between the Big Three. When Hopkins asked Stalin about Hitler's whereabouts, Stalin replied he thought Hitler was alive, had successfully escaped, and had maybe gone to Japan in a submarine. Ten days later, Zhukov organized a press conference in Berlin for foreign journalists. They expected confirmation of the discovery and identification of Hitler's remains. But to their surprise, Zhukov announced the opposite, that Hitler had not been found. He was certainly alive and had managed to flee, perhaps to Spain or Argentina. In mid-July, Stalin, Truman and Churchill met in Potsdam for their first post-war summit. The talks were to determine the future of Germany and large parts of Eastern Europe. A Truman advisor recalled later that during dinner with the US president, Stalin reaffirmed that Hitler is alive and is either in Spain or Argentina. In Potsdam, the leaders also had to decide which Nazi leaders would go on trial in a few months' time in Nuremberg. Stalin again said Hitler is alive, so he should have been at the top of the list of war criminals. But oddly, nobody wanted him. Not the Americans, nor the English. Not even Stalin himself.